Welcome everybody. I am so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for joining. I'm looking forward to getting to know you, getting to understand your challenges and your hopes over the next hour. Before we get going, I want you to check that your cell phones are in do not disturb mode and that you have got your worksheet that was emailed to you a couple of days ago, because we learn best when learning is active. If you didn't get your worksheet, I'm going to drop it here in the chat right now. And similarly, if you haven't received the Getting to Know You assessment, I'm also going to pop that in the chat, and I would ask that you complete that as we go along. I'm very excited and thrilled that you are here today because you have taken such an important step to express gratitude, to reflect before you start looking forward to 2025, to reflect on 2024 before you look forward to 2025. I'd love to know right now, actually, where each of you are dialing in from. So please share that in the chat. Let me know where you're located and what time it is for you. And also share what is the one thing that you would love to change or have different in your life. Now, I have done this exercise every year for the last few years, but this year is going to be a little different. And let me explain to you why. If you don't know my story, here's the quick overview. I am Raywin, the gutsy executive coach, former head of wellness for a global bank, turned functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, CBT hypnotherapist, best-selling author, speaker, coach, and learning and development manager for Biocanic, a functional medicine tech company. I help health conscious women in business transform from exhausted to empowered so they can achieve new levels of peace, purpose, and productivity. Now, I've been practicing functional medicine health coaching since 2016, so just about 8 years. And prior to that, I worked in corporate wellness for 5 years while living in London in the UK. And my academic background is in psychology, and that was largely because when I was 21, I needed to leave Trinidad, and I had a lot of troubles going on at that time due to living with my parents who were in what I've just found out is actually a cult. So I was raised in a cult, unwillingly, by the way. So it's important that you understand that I grew up in a way that most people's worldview is very different to the way that I grew up. And the questions that I ask and the way that I look at the world is through a very open-minded lens as a result of growing up in such a suppressed environment. And in rebellion, I gravitated toward yoga, manifesting, and multiple new age practices, including Reiki and chakra healing. And these practices became my lifestyle while I slept on sofas for about 2 to 3 years, going to university and working 3 jobs in London as a student. Now, I was really determined to do something meaningful with my life, if that story hasn't told you anything, because I wanted to have a life that was completely detached from my father's religious worldview and to help people who struggled with anxiety and wanted an alternative to medication, because I had seen what this had done after 20 years to my mother's father, who had been on Valium. He ended up with vascular dementia, and then, of course, my own 3 a.m. panic attacks that showed up later in life, they would occur because I would be so terrified that if I didn't make it on my own with my business, that I would be doomed to live suffocated and judged by my parents back in Trinidad. So I've been invested heavily into using my own story on how to heal naturally from chronic health conditions like anxiety, like IBS, like burnout, to be able to help women rewrite theirs. Now, a lot of my early work when I qualified as a hypnotherapist was very yogic. This was back in 2009, and it was very mantra based. And if you're in the wellness world, you will notice that there is a huge trend toward Eastern traditions and practices. However, after 22 years of chanting the Gayatri mantra every single day and doing Wayne Dyer's Om meditation for manifesting, COVID was actually the great awakener. Because of my work in functional medicine, I realized how corrupt the legacy media was, the agenda that they were pushing on the world. It reminded me of books that I had read as I was growing up, books like Animal Farm by George Orwell and A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And if you haven't read these books, I highly suggest you do, or get to Audible so that you can get those downloaded. Now, if reading isn't your thing, there are even movies about these things. So there's actually a movie called Brave New World with Peter Gallagher. Now, it was during this dark time as the whole world was coming out of the pandemic, and as I was actually in the process of becoming a legal permanent resident of the US after 3 years of going back and forth between California, the UK, and Mexico every 3 months. I ended up attending a church service by a church that had defied the government and stayed open during COVID. And despite being anti-church and Jesus, by this point, I was so disillusioned by lawmakers and policymakers due to their constant lies and having personally suffered because of their insane rules, which were not rooted in truth. I wanted to hear who these people were. I wanted to know who they were because I had never heard of any church doing such a thing. All of this to say that I went in looking for a political rally and I came out a completely different person. I ditched the yoga, the manifesting, the Buddhism immediately without anyone having to tell me to. It was like someone had turned my internal radio station from an AM to an FM radio, and I dedicated my life from that day forward to walking with God. It has honestly been the most incredible experience ever. I have seen doors open, opportunities show up effortlessly, not to mention tremendous healing from the trauma of my early childhood. As I began reading my Bible and realizing that the strict religious upbringing that brought me so much pain was very far removed from the relationship that I now have with God. I've been very nervous to talk about this and afraid to integrate it into my work because for so long I built my work around Eastern philosophies, which are all about you being enlightened and you being your own creator and you doing whatever you want, not what God wants. As you can see, this is pretty personal for me. So now that I've given you the backstory, that means the exercise that we're doing today is no longer being framed through the lens of manifesting, which is relying on your own understanding, but instead we are going to be surrendering our desires to God. So can I see a show of hands as to how many people have an active prayer life? Because as we move into the segment where we reflect on the last 12 months and what we've achieved, this verse from Philippians actually reminds us that all we need to do is come to God with thanksgiving and He will take care of the rest. So let's look at the exercise that we're going to do over the next 30 minutes as an opportunity to reflect with Thanksgiving. So let's look back now on this past year and acknowledge both the wins and the lessons. Where did you see growth or success or wins? Has any of this surprised you? What goals did you hit or exceed? And what are you most thankful for? I'll set the timer for 2 minutes. One minute to go. Okay, we are coming up to time. Now, the reason I like focusing on being thankful is that modern day neuroscience has shown that gratitude practices can actually transform the neural pathways of people with anxiety and depression if they practice and exercise like a gratitude journal every day. And I love when science catches up with biblical principles. So, does anyone want to share their wins? Now let's look at what actually contributed to this. What goals didn't you hit and why? What did you enjoy doing most this year? What did you like least? What took up the most time and why? Now, as we shift gears into looking at the future, this sentiment is repeated in various forms throughout the New Testament. And We're reminded that often in our weakness, God will show up to help carry the load. And while there does not need to be a lot of effort on our part, He does meet us sometimes even more than halfway. And it can be in the form of a friend, a relative, a colleague, a song, a coach, or a mentor. So as you look into 2025 and you're creating your big vision, I want you to think about all the things that your heart is longing for and leave nothing off the table. Now, jot down your top 3 goals. Did you know that people who set goals are 42% more likely to achieve them? I don't know about you, but I'm a major list maker and I love nothing better than crossing things off my list. So let's put the timer on for another couple of minutes as you work through these goals. And now that we're back, does anyone feel comfortable enough sharing? Now, what steps do you actually need to take to get there? Now that you've created the goals, now what are the actions? Are you holding on to old thoughts and patterns that previously may have kept you safe, but right now they're holding you back? What would it feel like for you to let that go? Will you be lighter? Will you be freer? Do you know how to let it go? Would it surprise you to know that very often the issues that you're stuck on can actually show up in your body as physical symptoms like a congested liver, which can mean that you've got poor hormone metabolism, and that can lead to poor skin health as well as gut health and poor focus and memory, as well as many other conditions that seem purely physical, but very often there is an underlying cause. And it would make sense to address both the physical as well as the psychological. So how are you going to get to where you want to go? Let me tell you a story about Fiona. Fiona was one of my very first clients who worked for Amazon as a buyer. She struggled with panic attacks, amongst many other things. She was already eating fairly healthy, according to her, going to spin and hot yoga every day, and she looked like a healthy person. But she was struggling to sleep, and her skin was a mess. And even though she was exercising 2 times a day, she found it very difficult to shift stubborn weight. Can anyone here guess why that was? If you don't know, cortisol can make it very difficult. So cortisol is your stress hormone, can make it very difficult for you to actually shift weight and can actually cause your body to store fat. And if you are toxic because of pathogens or exposure. Now, in Fiona's case, when she and I worked together, we discovered she had an overgrowth of pathogens in her gut and her liver was congested, which meant her hormones weren't being metabolized well, hence the extra pounds that refused to shift despite the vigorous exercise. So you know what I actually suggested? Fiona, you need to work out less. Less? Yes. Instead of topping and tailing your day with workouts, alternate your days and only do one every other day. And that was in addition to the protocol that she went on for healing her pathogenic overgrowth in her gut. And the CBT hypnotherapy that we did, within 2 weeks, she was sleeping well, waking up rested, and surprise, surprise, she showed up saying that her figure was more toned even though she was exercising less. And bonus, her skin was clearer. And in fact, she wrote me 6 months after we'd finished our work together, and she said she hadn't had a panic attack in 6 months and her anxiety was at a 0. We got strategic. We zeroed in on what worked for her based off of functional lab work. I've had so many of these stories from the last 8 years of transformations. In fact, there are even people on this call who are in the middle of their transformation right now. When you get clarity on what is happening with your body, it becomes so much easier. Now I want you to take a moment and get settled into your posture. Close your eyes, uncross your arms and legs, place your feet flat on the ground, and take a nice slow breath in and release. We're going to start doing some work on regulating your nervous system. And in your mind's eye, picture a day where you wake up before your alarm with enough energy and excitement for both your work and your life. You may not even need an alarm because you're waking up with so much gratitude and zeal for the day. Picture a day when people who've known you forever come up to you and say, "What is your secret? I haven't seen you looking this well or this happy in years." Picture a day when you can look back on your life and legacy and know that you left nothing on the table, that you made an impact and you lived fully, all because you had the courage to start listening to your body and finally giving it what it needs. Settle into this vision of yourself. Allow this vision to permeate your cells, because guess what? They're listening. Now, I want to invite you to take some inspired action. All of those wonderful goals that you just set, you're going to make much better headway on them if you are actually working with someone. So I'd love to meet with you so that you can begin 2025 from a place of strength and boldness, secure that you know what's going on with your body and confident that you have a plan that will help you get to where you want to go. So scan this QR code to make your appointment. I have got some slots open on January 8th, and I would love to see you in the new year. And until then, I just want to thank you for your time today and wish you very happy holidays and a Merry Christmas.